Good evening and welcome to Behind the Headlines. Today is Wednesday, the 3rd of March, 2021. And in this programme tonight, we will be discussing the alarming rise of Jew hatred in Germany and asking the question, should we be concerned? Regan, this is such an important topic, and primarily because it does involve Covid-19, but because of Covid-19, we are missing so many big news developments that are breaking throughout the world because our mainstream news coverage is, let's have Covid-19, a bit on the royal family, a little bit on vaccines, and that's it. And so therefore, very big and spiritually impacting stories like the rise of Jew hatred, to the extent this is a 2-decade high record, is very alarming, is not being reported by our mainstream media.
Yeah, absolutely, Simon. I mean, our mainstream media looks more like some sort of self-help guide with some very scary viral news and some gossip about the royals, like you said, or just little clips from celebrities to get you through the next day of lockdown. It's just all ridiculous. But we have something very, very serious with this steep rise in Jew hatred, anti-Semitism in Germany. And we've talked before about how anti-Semitism is seemingly on the rise, really, across the Western world. We have to, in one way, ask the question, what's new? Here's another pandemic, another plague. The Jews historically were routinely blamed for so much that went wrong. Going back to the Middle Ages, going back to when, as a result of diaspora, many Jews came to prominence in what was essentially a barbaric society with their education, with the ability of literature, scientific acumen, so many different giftings that were there. The Jews in the Middle Ages were gaining prominence, they were gaining wealth, they were gaining status, kind of what we see happens all the way back in Egypt at the end of Genesis and the beginning of Exodus. Absolutely. So what happens? Oh, they're taking us over. That lot's coming in, and they're dominating. They're changing our valued customs. They're making us feel dirty. No, so we're going to blame them. We're going to say that they're dirty. We're going to say that they're the ones who are causing the plague. So bubonic plague, the Black Death, blamed on the Jews by so many, even though they had nothing to do with it. And that pattern has been seen time and time and time again. The Nazis spun this web. Now we have here, and as a result of lockdowns and the COVID-19 pandemic and warring political factions, this toxic soup that's led to where we're at.
Absolutely, and I think 80 years on from the Second World War and the horrors of the Shoah, the Holocaust, it is a reminder to us all of the great danger of what happens, particularly in a nation like Germany, with a very dark history. And when you start to see this virus, and it is a virus, Jew hatred, that first attacks the Jewish people and then attacks the entire world and actually threatens our Western civilization, this is when we have to take notice. So just a reminder, we are live, we are interactive. We'd love to know your thoughts and your comments. Are you concerned about the rise of Jew hatred in Germany? Let's have your thoughts. I mean, looking at this one, I'm going to read out this one, that this is a special year for Germany's Jewish community and also Germany as well, primarily because in Germany they will be celebrating 1,700 years of Jewish life in that territory. And the first Jewish settlement was founded near the Alps in 321 AD. So if anyone says the Jewish people are aliens, they've probably been around longer than so many other native Germans.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen constant instability in Germany throughout history. We can look at our nation. We were talking prior to the show just about how we're Anglo-Saxon in many ways. We're very much a Germanic people. So here we have a situation where there's people who are in a tight-knit community that believes in monogamy, that believes in heterosexual monogamy, that is thriving, that values family, that has a healthy rooting in good morals, that worships one God. So many things that provide stability, and everywhere else, what we see in Germany is unstable. There's constant instability. We already have an email here from Anita. Good evening, Simon and Regan. It's lovely to see you both as ever. Anti-Semitism or Jew hatred has always increased whenever there has been a pandemic. Quite right, Anita. In the Middle Ages, the Jews were often blamed for the plague and for the Spanish flu. This latest uprising has caused greater concern, though, because it appears that many groups who would not normally associate are uniting in their hatred of the Jews. In November last year, Euronews reported that, quote, Corona protesters have an anti-Semitic narrative. For the first time, we're seeing groups that would normally have nothing to do with each other united in the protest. Right-wing groups, left-wing extremists, Islamist groups, and anti-Semitism acts as a binder, and that's new. Anti-Semitism was on the rise in many areas before this pandemic, but it is very concerning to see this latest turn of events. Thank you very much for that, Anita. Much love to you. On that, I think there's also the danger, and we'll be delving into some of this reality of different groups coming together, where normal people who might have issues with some of the COVID regulations are getting caught up in this, and simply because they are part of a group or a protest, they become tarnished themselves by this label of anti-Semitism. I know of some people who have fallen into conspiracies, George Soros and all of that, and the target is not misgivings about a particular individual. The target really is the fact that this man, George Soros, is a Jew, and by nature of George Soros being a Jew, then all of the other Jews are in some way to blame for COVID-19, even though none of them have anything to do with COVID-19. So it's a really troubling state of affairs.
Yeah, and it's also extremely dangerous. But I also need to point out historically that West Germany, after the Second World War, paid massive war reparations to Israel in 1952. The German government itself does actually, wherever anti-Semitism arises, really stamps down and takes this seriously. I was working with an organisation back in 2009. We had a press conference with the, it was called Monitoring the EU. Impact SE, and their job was to monitor education systems around the world. So had a press conference on Iranian education, for example, and what the Iranian regime are actually teaching their school children. And of course, there were lots of anti-Israel references in the textbooks, what could be deemed as anti-Semitic. And after the press conference, I got invited to give a briefing to the German embassy. Because they wanted to know about it. So they do take this seriously, but what's happening at the moment, and this is where, if you're going to tackle something like Jew hatred, then you have to tackle its source and then identify where that comes from. And the problem with the German federal government at the moment is that it's blaming 90% of anti-Semitic attacks and incidences purely on the rise of the far right and neo-Nazis. So ignoring the anti-Semitism that comes in the left in the disguise of anti-Israel, anti-Zionism, but also more dangerously ignoring the anti-Semitic sentiments within large sections of the Islamic population in Germany, particularly knowing there's a lot of Turks in Germany, and President Erdogan of Turkey is a leading member of the Muslim Brotherhood. And of course, we've had that 1.3 million Muslim refugees from the Middle East find a home for themselves in Germany. So the government is in Germany wanting to turn a blind eye to this, despite academics, leaders in the Jewish community saying you need to look at this and address this. And because of political correctness, they're keeping quiet.
Yeah, Germany in its population generally saw a decrease between 2010 and 2016. At the same time, between those same dates, there was a massive increase from about 3.3 million to 5 million Muslims in Germany. I was watching a video where a man who had lived in Israel, a Jewish man, had returned. I believe he was originally from Germany, but thought he would go back and live in Germany for a while longer. And he was describing this series of events wherein he was just walking down the street and some cars were stuck in traffic. And suddenly some men unilaterally jumped out and started swearing at him, shouting at him, calling him a dirty Jew and all manner of hateful things. And he said this was tragically something that was becoming more and more common. He identified these men as Muslims. And we have to understand, if we see this rise of anti-Semitism, yes, the far right is going to be involved. Far right is always involved in anti-Semitism. At the same time, there has to be a recognition that a core policy, a core part of Islamic belief is Jew hatred. Call it what it is. You look at Hezbollah, you look at Hamas, you look at these organizations, look at Iran on the other side of things. You have organizations that's primary objective is to wipe Israel, what we know as Israel, off the face of the earth, ridding it of all Jews. They would be perfectly happy with another Holocaust.
Which is genocide.
It is, exactly. And so you have this wedding, kind of what Anita was getting at, these weird alliances, these unions between far-right protesters who hate, that they're also Islamophobic, that they have no good intentions towards Muslims. At the same time, you have Muslims with far right, with, as you indicated, the left-wing media that says Israel shouldn't exist and free Palestine and all of that. And so, where do the Jews go? Where can they go? Where can they turn? Where can they have freedom outside of Israel? Where can they know acceptance and love? It's a real problem. We go all the way back. I already mentioned the medieval ages. As we're beginning to move out of the medieval ages into the Reformation period, tragically, we even have leaders in Christianity as such, who
Martin Luther, classic example.
And look, Martin Luther was initially friendly-ish to the Jews. At first, he didn't seem to, in his words, have much against them. He desired them to come to believe in Jesus. But when many didn't believe in Jesus, he began to grow increasingly irate. It was as though he took it personally rather than seeing it as just something that spurred him on to love them more and show them the gospel more. He did something that really sent things into a spiral, not only in his own relationship with the Jews, but for centuries to come. This is what he said in one moment in his book concerning the Jews and their lies, 1543. "Let the magistrates burn their synagogues, and let whatever escapes be covered with sand and mud. Let them be forced to work, and if this avails nothing, we will be compelled to expel them like dogs." Martin Luther.
I'm familiar with that. I'm familiar with that quote. I'm also familiar with his book, The Jews and Their Lies, which does put a dark stain on the whole Reformation movement, because
it's tragic.
Clearly, that was a move of God. But I think if you allow anti-Semitism to take root in your heart, it's not a good thing. So he really has not left a good testimony behind. And personally, I find it very difficult how anyone can be a born-again believer and hate the Jewish people. You only have to read the Bible. You only have to read Revelation right at the end, where it talks about the New Jerusalem. It talks about the temple being built with 12 gates, which represent the 12 tribes of Israel. 12 tribes of Israel. And then inside the courts, another 12 gates for the 12 disciples. Were they all Jewish? Yes. So effectively, you're attacking the Jewish Messiah, you're attacking the Hebrew Bible, and you're attacking the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But also, Hitler used Martin Luther and his book as justification why the church should support the Nazi Party. And so that's very, very dangerous when we get our theology wrong, and the implications that that book has had on German culture for centuries is frightening.
Fast forward a couple of hundred years after the Reformation, you still have this problem. It continued for a good space of time. You then have a German writer, Wilhelm Marr, and he was probably the first person to use the term anti-Semitism in a pamphlet, The Victory of Judaism Over Germandom. And this whole web of deceit is spun where the Jews are out to end Germany as we know it. He argued that acculturated Jews would eventually subvert traditional German culture. They would corrupt all German standards, dominate commerce, push themselves ever more into state services. That's early 1800s. Heinrich Tritzky, I'm probably not saying that right, wrote a long essay in 1879 in which he claimed that the fundamental differences between the German Jews and Christians could not be reconciled, and so that and this was because the Jews had usurped too large a place in our life, that is, as a nation, linking that with stuff that was coming out of England as a result of Charles Darwin's views on natural selection, survival of the fittest, the idea of the superior Aryan race, which was primarily throughout, it was deemed as primarily European, primarily throughout Europe. You have people who begin to devour these things and read these things. These tracts, these pamphlets, these essays find their ways into the hands of a young man who is innocuous enough. He was studying some art, and that man would go on to spearhead a movement that would see over 6 million Jews massacred, Adolf Hitler, through the reading of those words. You were right, Martin Luther's book inspired him. Not only did it inspire him, it inspired him so much that at the Nuremberg rallies, long before, a few years before the Nuremberg trials, that book was paraded, encased in a protective case, paraded as an example of a wonderful founding German document. This is what happens.
No, absolutely, and that's why it's so important that we raise this issue today, particularly with what's happening in Germany. We have, just a reminder, we are live, we are interactive tonight, so I'd love to know your views and your comments on Jew hatred, but in particular, how it relates to Germany. But before we do that, let's go to this CBN news item produced by Dale Hurd about anti-Semitism in Germany.
This isn't the Middle East, it's Germany, where Muslims now outnumber Jews 50-1, and where for the first time since the Nazi regime, Jewish leaders are warning that it's too dangerous to wear the kippah or Jewish cap in some areas.
And me, myself, I wouldn't wear a kippah. Unfortunately, it's not safe. Maybe I hope that it will be safe in future, or maybe it was safe in the past, but right now, in 2019, no, it is not safe at all, unfortunately.
A magazine even printed a paper kippah for all Germans to wear, to show solidarity with Jews. The German government and media say the threat to Jews comes equally from the far right and from Muslim immigrants. And while there is a dangerous neo-Nazi movement in Germany that hates Jews, Chancellor Angela Merkel's welcome of more than 1 million Muslims from countries with anti-Semitic cultures has caused some Jews to join the so-called far right for protection. This is Germany's third largest political party, AfD, or Alternative for Germany, which the left-dominated German media brands as Nazi, although its platform looks a lot like the Republican Party in America. It has shown stronger support for Israel than any other major German party, and now has a chapter called Jews in the AfD. At their first meeting, members sang Ose Shalom. So why would Jews join a so-called Nazi party? Maybe they don't think it's Nazi. Or maybe they think they face a more serious threat. The German media treats Jews in the AfD as a publicity stunt. Jewish groups have warned that AfD is no friend of the Jews. The founder of the group, Bernhard Krauskopf, has been denounced as a Jewish Nazi.
Look, when the media tells you that the AfD is a Nazi party, and when the media looks for some Nazis, which we have, like all the parties in Germany, this is nothing special about the AfD. The left consists of Jew haters. Not all of them, but the majority of them. Yes, we have some of those people. We try to get rid of them. It's not so easy because we have free speech.
But AfD leaders have said some disturbing things. Bjorn Höcke called Berlin's Holocaust Memorial a memorial of disgrace and said Germans should stop feeling guilty. Alexander Gauland said that Hitler and the Nazis are just a speck of bird poop in over 1,000 years of successful German history. Krauskopf says he doesn't like those comments, but he says what Angela Merkel has done to make Germany unsafe for Jews is far worse.
To import Jew haters into Germany while knowing it is an anti-Jewish act. That's not just, some memorial. This is reducing our security in Germany by the Chancellor of Germany herself.
There were never a lot of Jews in Germany. Even before the Nazis, Jews were less than 1% of the population. And almost 75 years after the defeat of the Nazis, Jews in Germany still only number about 115,000. And they're feeling increasingly outnumbered and in danger because of Muslim immigration, which Krauskopf says is far worse than the German government will admit.
They are playing it on. They're lying. They have no other word. They are lying about it. So there are lots of excuses, and the situation gets worse every day because the government has lost control. Jew haters have been imported. You know these are Jew haters. So now you have no excuses like the normal excuse was after World War II. Yeah, but we didn't know that this would happen. We didn't know. You know it now.
Dale Hurd, CBN News, Berlin.
Excellent report there by Dale Hurd. But I need to make a remark about the AfD. Now, many of these popular right-wing political parties that we're seeing across Europe sound good. For example, they're against the European Union. They're against immigration. They are skeptical of multiculturalism. Very much kind of views that we understand here with Brexit. But the troubling thing is, particularly also with Marine Le Pen's party as well, the National Front, is that there's a great danger that the main support base of these political parties have an extreme neo-Nazi fascist element within these parties, which they do not distance themselves from. So we need to take a little bit of care when it comes to these political parties and really find out who their supporters are and who they're supporting. We've got a few more emails, so over to you, Regan.
Yes, so we have this from Jay. Hi, a friend is very into conspiracy theories and mentions the Rothschilds' role in the founding of Israel. Could you give me an overview of this and your opinion of this very controversial family? Great show, Jay. It's not what we're talking about this evening and in regards to the Rothschilds and the founding of Israel, but I would say you've termed it correctly. Conspiracy theories, don't give them airtime, and so many of these conspiracy theories are just filled with...
Let's put the record straight. He did not fund Israel. He was not the main financial supporter behind Israel, but he did fund one Jewish community, which is a now really nice, pleasant town, and they did help to buy what is the area of Armageddon in the Galilee. So where Israel's agricultural plain is, which is all by Megiddo, all on that plain until you go all the way up to Nazareth, which was virtually all swampland. Him and some other Jewish philanthropists bought that land off some Arab landlords, got the deeds for those lands, knowing that the Arabs were thinking, you bought this land, how stupid are you? This is just nothing but swampland. Paid ridiculous odds for it, something like, at the time in the early 20s, around 200 million US dollars.
Same here.
So, I mean, in today's terms, we're talking maybe even $1 trillion for the same amount of land in today's money. So there was that element of it. But, you know, the other thing is that it was founded through Jewish communities all over the world. So you can't just take one thing and say, Rothschild found that. Yes, there is element of truth in it, but then it gets exaggerated and, you know, myths and lies come about, and then, you know, but, you know, maybe we need to do a program on the Illuminati, but it's not this program.
I mean, honestly, I'm not overly bothered. I'm not. If the Rothschilds, let's suppose they funded the whole thing, I look at it and think, what a wonderful use of money in God's providence. It has allowed many Jews a place of safety and a place where they can call home once again, the land, that patch of land that was theirs to begin with. So it's one of those things, Jay, just do some research, some reading of it, but don't give airtime to anti-Semitic conspiracy theories by any means. Engage your friend usefully. Hi, Simon. Why do people hate Jews so much? I just can't get my head around it.
Spiritual.
It is exactly what Jane goes on to say. Is it a huge spiritual battle?
Of course it is.
Jane, you have your answer. It is a spiritual battle.
I mean, I think we have. I mean, I didn't expect to go down this route, but since we got this question, let's go down this route. Look, when it comes to the Jewish people, Satan, I believe, hates the Jewish people more than he does Christians. And the reason I say that is because they remind him of what they have. And what I mean by that is that Satan was called the great morning star, that he was in charge, he was the chief worshipper, and then he rebels against God with a third of the angels and gets kicked out of heaven. And then we see the Lord create mankind and the human race, and it decides to choose one special people with a special country called Israel, in which the Messiah would go through. So we also saw with the high priests that they took the role that was originally Satan's. So therefore, there is absolute hatred and anger that the Messiah comes from the root of Jesse. It comes through David's line. And therefore, knowing that Satan is going to be destroyed, well, he was defeated on the cross, but he won't actually die because he'll be tormented for every day of his life in the furnace of hell. But you know, until the end of the book of Revelation and the end of the millennium reign, that is when that will take place with the white seats of judgment. And so therefore, Satan actually knows with the existence of the Jewish people and the fulfillment of biblical prophecy, if he can wipe out the Jewish people, there's no Israel, there's no Jerusalem, then the Messiah, Jesus Christ, can't come back and rule and reign from Jerusalem and the Mount of Olives. He can then accuse God of being a liar. So we have this absolute fundamental hatred of the Jewish people mentioned right in the book of Genesis and Exodus.
It's all about seeking to destroy the credibility and trustworthiness of God's promises.
Haman, Esther, even the book of Revelation with the Antichrist, it mentions how everyone will be worshipping Satan, the dragon, and then he will declare war on the Jewish children.
And as we're filming this just days after Purim as well, it's a timely reminder to maybe go back and look at Esther and look and realize that no matter what forces might come against those people who are God's covenant people, God always wins.
Absolutely.
Even if the odds are so stacked heavily against, and even what we're seeing in Germany, we know we can look at this with hope, not despair.
How many Romans do you know? Egyptians do you know? Aztecs do you know? How many Soviets do you know? How many Nazis do you know? And we saw these great empires of the world. How many Babylonians do you know? They've gone the way of history, but the Jewish people are still here.
Still there.
I think that's the answer.
It seems anti-Semitism is more of a leftist trait, with the Labour and Democrat parties having issues. I would say it's all across, but yes, the Labour and Democrat parties do have their issues. Many on the US right are very positive to Israel, also true. Apart, of course, from far-right groups, which are pariahs to most, and hopefully with tiny membership, sadly growing membership in those groups, though. News Today reported German government branded the AfD extremist and will be spied on. But as you've indicated, Simon, we might do best to steer clear of the AfD, or certainly to watch them closely and to...
Yeah, I mean, some of the stuff they stand for, you know, they oppose greater European integration within the European Union. They oppose mass immigration of different cultures into their country. They want to act on behalf of Germany's national interests. So there are elements that you can attain to, but sometimes, and certainly with these organizations, you have to be very concerned about who their hardcore supporters are. Anything else?
Yes, we have from Rita, dear Simon and Regan. First of all, just to say, both my husband and I try never to miss your program, which is extremely interesting and enlightening. Thank you for that, Rita. As a German national and a Christian, as you can imagine, I'm deeply disturbed about the uprising of anti-Semitism yet again in Germany. As a young person, I read the Holocaust, and I recall I could not stop crying. It ultimately led to me coming to the UK and never returning. Oh. The guilt of our history has never left me. It just is incomprehensible how people think and how they have not learned anything from history. I salute you both in Revelation TV for championing the Jews' cause and shedding a light to what is actually going on in a way that is truly keeping the issue in the forefront of our minds and highlighting the need for our urgency of prayers for our Jewish brothers and sisters. Thank you for that, Rita. Very helpful perspective.
I'm just going to read out a few statistics, and these are taken from an excellent article by Soren Koren entitled Germany, Covid-19 Triggers a New Wave of Anti-Semitism, published by the Gatestone Institute, that indicate that in Germany are now facing a two-decade high recording of anti-Semitic incidents. So police in Germany have reported a total of 2,275 anti-Semitic hate crimes, on average 6 a day in 2020, according to the federal government of Germany. This is a 10% increase in comparison to 2019. Police were able to identify 1,367 suspects, but only 5 were arrested. And what is troubling is that the federal German government and police are blaming neo-Nazis and the far right for this large increase in anti-Semitism, which is not the case. Now, I'm going to give you some other statistics here as well. So in May 2019, the German Interior Minister blamed 90% of anti-Semitic attacks on the German far right, despite leaders of the Jewish community, academics and experts in this field saying this is not the case. And of course, then we also saw the 1.3 million immigrants come in from the Middle East, particularly from Syria, and of course exporting their anti-Semitic views into Germany. Now, earlier today, I recorded an interview with a prominent German Christian on the rise of Jew hatred in Germany, Harold Urquhart. So let's take a look at this recording. Now joined on Behind the Headlines by Harold Urquhart, who is the global director of Global Prayer Call for Israel and the Nations. Harold, warm welcome to Behind the Headlines.
Thank you so much, Simon.
It's a pleasure. And can you share with us your love and your passion the Lord has given you for Israel and the Jewish people, and how you've really been used to bring reconciliation between Christians and Jews in Germany, but also across the world?
Well, thank you, Simon. I've been born in Munich, and I grew up in Munich, Germany. And Munich has been the city out of which the Nazi movement was born and developed after World War I in the 15 years between 1918 and 1933. And so becoming a teenager, realizing in which city, in which nation I've been born, it was a big burden for me. And praise the Lord, then I met Jesus, and he transformed me in many different levels and also in the area of my identity, my German identity. And this was a powerful transformation, inspired by the Bible, inspired by things that I've experienced in my young life at that time. And out of that, a deep love to the Jewish people and to Israel was put in my heart, what I believe from God, my Father, and it transformed me already in late teenage years. And that's when the story started.
Amazing. And isn't it extraordinary to think, Harold, that this year, 2021, Germany will be celebrating 1,700 years of Jewish life on its territory. But at the same time, we also see that we have a 2-decade high levels in terms of anti-Semitism. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, this is an ambivalence, and I would even call it stronger if I'm free to do so. I feel that Germany is kind of torn apart, like our soul is torn apart. On the one hand, there is this recognition of the Jewish contribution to society, civilization in Germany, in Europe, over 1,700 years. On the other hand, there's still this broad anti-Semitism now being revived in a modern form, in a different clothing, but still as hateful and as powerful as it used to be in the past. And we are kind of torn in between both.
And Harold, when it comes to Germany's Nazi past, we know that, for example, the German government in 1952 made war reparations to the newly formed modern state of Israel. We also seen that the West German government have done so much to stop or to confront the rise of Jew hatred within Germany. And yet today we're seeing record levels of Jew hatred in Germany. What do you think are the key factors that are triggering this awful rise of anti-Semitism?
Well, I would say anti-Zionism is the major power behind modern anti-Semitism. Because of media and different things, Israel is portrayed mainly in a negative tendency, in a negative light. Israel is more portrayed as a problem than as a solution. But from that tendency, different forces in society in Germany feel inspired in their mistrust, in their manipulation, deception, influence they receive and they pass on. And it may be right-wing, left-wing, but more than is appreciated also on the Muslim side of anti-Semitism. And all three of them are a strong alliance and influence more and more even center of society.
According to my notes here, there's excellent article written by Soren Kern, who writes for the Gatestone Institute. In which he's raised a very valid point. He says that the federal government of Germany is blaming the rise of Jew hatred on Germany on the neo-Nazis and the far right, and is turning a blind eye to what he described as Islamic anti-Semitism, and particularly those Muslim immigrants who came from the Middle East a few years ago to settle in Germany are holding these views, and yet the federal government is turning a blind eye. Why do you think the federal government in Germany is not actually confronting this major problem, but instead blaming the far right for this rise of Jew hatred?
Well, it's exactly an expression. I appreciate the search of this man, and I confirm his analysis in that regard. And Germany is torn in two directions. There is, number one, the politically correct fight against anti-Semitism as part of our responsibility historically and towards Israel. But it's like of double-tongued. There's the other side of it, and official policy tries to balance both the responsibility for the past officially, and then also the anti-Semitic and anti-Israel tendency that's coming from out of mainstream population more and more. and to ignore more or less as much as they can the effect of the strong Muslim influence of anti-Semitism in Germany at the schools, at the working places, at the social media, on many, many different levels, is basically because officially they are the friends of the Palestinian people against Israel, and somehow they have to secure and save their narrative.
And also, we're seeing that the rise of anti-Semitism in Germany is being fueled by the COVID-19 global pandemic, and particularly the internet and social media, with statements like this that the Jews are seeking to profit from COVID-19, from the pharmaceutical industry, that the Jews are responsible for spreading the virus to create a new world order to tighten their grip on the world economy, and other such horrendous medieval lies that we saw being peddled during that time. So what can the German government do really to counter this hatred against Jewish people that we're seeing online in Germany?
Well, actually, what is needed is a change in tendency, a change in general awareness and general communication, beginning with the political side, but being confirmed by the media side. There's just a tendency, a trend that is anti-Israeli, anti-Zionist in DNA, and there is where the change and the adaptation needs to happen. It needs to be in our attitude, first of all, and from a better attitude, a better perception of realities, of political realities in Israel, the Middle East, and even in Germany. And out of this different perception, a different communication outside, both to Israel and the Jewish community, but also to our public sphere. And a change of attitude actually is the most important and the beginning point.
And how is the German Jewish community feeling? Because it's a very special year for them to celebrate 1,700 years of living in German territory is an incredibly long time. And yet we see this massive spike of Jew hatred being directed against the community. How are they feeling at this time?
Well, the sense of concern and sometimes even fear is growing. And that's clear. That's even made clear and can be proved by the fact that more and more Jewish people are getting information about Aliyah, making Aliyah. So they want to inform themselves that at a certain point, whatever the point is, they would be ready to go to Israel, which would be against the trend, because usually they try to settle down here and be part of a new Germany and a new life. But they realize more and more, some earlier, some later, that the atmosphere is going against them, and they're trying to get ready to be, in case of escalation, ready to go to Israel. And they are more and more coming to the offices to get their information.
I'm also seeing that we're seeing a rise of Jew hatred being demonstrated at these anti-government restrictions and lockdown demonstrations all over Germany. I think in some cases that over 100,000 people have attended since March of last year. There's been over 100 of these rallies right across Germany. And we're seeing that some of the protesters are wearing yellow T-shirts with yellow stars with unvaccinated on it, and with slogans like vaccinations will make you free, in reference to Auschwitz-Birkenau, and also other Holocaust references. Isn't there a great danger that these anti-COVID-19 protesters, as well as anti-vaxxers, are fueling a new rise of Jew hatred because they are trivializing the horrors that took place against the Jewish people by the Nazi regime?
Yeah, I'm sure that this is happening, and we are aware of that. But I would say the anti-Semitic people, they have a habit and a tendency to ride on any wave that's coming along. Whatever the crisis is, whatever the wave is, whatever color it carries, anti-Semites find a way to blame Jews for it. That has been the case for centuries and even millennia, and in a different modern form with the transit, with the crisis today. They just ride on the same horse, but with a different jacket on it. So that's what I would say. So yes, they are there, and they make themselves known, and they are loud. But if the next crisis comes, if the next wave comes, they jump on that horse.
And Harold, two last questions before we go. What policies would you like to see the federal government in Germany implement to really stamp out on this extremely troubling rise of Jew hatred in Germany, particularly knowing Germany's past?
Well, the most important thing in my view is consistency. Consistency in the solidarity with Jewish people here in Germany as well as with Israel and the state of Israel. And this consistency is not there. So they contradict themselves time and again. And it's a double tongue, it's a double speech. And this creates confusion and room for manipulation and for different forces to come in and take advantage of that.
And finally, Harold, what role can Christians in Germany play and across Europe in confronting the rise of Jew hatred and anti-Israel sentiment and reassure our precious Jewish communities across the continent of Europe?
I would say there are different levels. There is a theological, intellectual level, and Christians need to get rid of replacement theology and find a biblical approach to God's covenant and promises to the Jewish people in Israel. Number two, it's prayer. And number three, it's becoming active in communication, even in the discussions within public and within the church on the topic of God's love for Israel and the Jewish people.
Excellent. Harold, I just thank you so much for joining me from Germany today to discuss the alarming rise of Jew hatred in Germany. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
We have another few emails here. This is from our good friend Robin Benson. Hi, Simon and Regan. Thanks for taking on yet another difficult issue of our time. Based on its voting record at the UN and associated bodies, Germany's government is hypocritical. It may appear to take so-called strong measures against anti-Semites in German society, but at the UN, Germany takes a clear anti-Israel line in its voting record against Israel when it comes to motions critical of Israel on a wide variety of subjects. This really calls into question, in my estimation, the integrity of what the German federal government says and does. And keep up the good work, both of you. I think Robin sums it up very well there.
No, absolutely. So quickly adding, it was the German government under Merkel that pressured other Eastern European nations for moving their embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And that just shows you the level of treachery being carried out by the German government.
We have this. We have this from Keith. Hi guys, fascinating discussion. But do you realize that anti-Semitism is more virulent and widespread in the second German nation of Austria? There was a report of a holiday chalet company in the mountains of the Austrian Tyrol that had an official policy of refusing bookings from Jewish people or turned away anyone who looked Jewish. That's tragic and something that I think probably would happen in quite a few countries, maybe even our own.
Yeah, but very quickly on that comment, within 10 seconds, Germany has come to terms with its Nazi past and its historical past. Austria hasn't. That's the big difference. And they honoured their Nazi war criminals after the Second World War.
And we have this from Kev. Hi, the man that loves Jesus loves Israel and the Jews. I'm a simple man saved to have eternal life with God and all who choose Jesus. My prayer is for Christians who are blinded to the word about Israel's land and people to repent and ask God to show the truth. It has to be spiritual, as even those that don't believe in God know that the Jews are God's children. Wake up to truth. Please, please tell all to push into God's word and truth. Once Holy Spirit power is in you, then truth is simple. And indeed, we see throughout the letter of Romans, I mean, that whole letter deals with the tension between Gentile background believers and Jewish background believers. Paul says, what advantage has the Jew? Well, much in every way. At the same time, he goes on to show that that advantage that they have is nothing outside of Christ. And so as Christians, we call people to into the family of God, which is through the Jewish Messiah, Jesus Christ. And we look forward to that day, and we pray for that day when there will be reconciliation.
And Gentiles not to be haughty.
Exactly.
If I just read out this really quickly, because another key component of the rise of Jew hatred in Germany has been the COVID-19 restriction government rallies organised in Germany. So far there have been over 100,000 Germans that have attended them. There's been over 100 rallies since March of 2020. The largest one took place in Berlin on the 29th of August 2020 that turned violent. It was infiltrated by several hundred neo-Nazi activists waving Nazi flags. Some of the protesters there wore T-shirts with yellow stars on them entitled "Unvaccinated, Vaccination Makes You Free," in reference to "Work Makes You Free," which was the sign on the entrance to Auschwitz. We also see that comments like "Final Solution of the Corona Question" and "Vaccination Daku." Others have mentioned that the German government internment camps are very much like Nazi concentration camps, and they said, "We now know what it likes to be Anne Frank." And that is one of the big problems, is that this anti-COVID-19 government restrictions rally that's pulling the left, the right, Islamists and others to the plight are getting caught up in this anti-Semitic Jew hatred fever, that what we're seeing is a real trivialization of the Holocaust and what happened. And this again is fueling anti-Semitism in Germany.
This has been brewing for a while. In 2018, the EU Agency for Fundamental Rights carried out a survey amongst German Jews on anti-Semitism. And they found that 41% of German Jews have been harassed simply because they are Jewish. 29% said that they had experienced offensive or threatening comments, up from 21% in 2012. 50% were fearful of physical attack, up from 34% in 2012. The head of the Central Council of Jews in Germany, Josef Schuster, said in January 2018, "It is part of everyday Jewish life that our institutions are under police protection. Jewish pupils are under police protection, and we are increasingly reluctant to make ourselves known as Jews in public." 36% of Jews in Germany chose not to wear, carry or display items that could identify them as Jewish. And in German schools, Jewish students and teachers hide their Jewish identity. In some cases, public schools cannot ensure the physical safety of Jewish students, and they've been transferred to Jewish schools. A tragic, damning state of affairs.
Absolutely, but it's not only the state that this is happening in Germany, and the reason why this is so important is because the Third Reich was responsible for the death of over 6 million Jewish lives in the Holocaust. They're the ones that instigated the Nuremberg laws. They're the ones that took Jew hatred to a level that we've never seen it before. So to see the rise of Jew hatred again in Germany should alarm us all, because what starts with the Jewish people never finishes the Jewish people. And the Jewish people are the canary in the mine. And if they're in trouble, that means we're in trouble. And of course, from a scriptural point of view, in Genesis 12, 1-3, it says, "I will bless those who bless you, but I will curse those who curse you." So anyone that comes against the Jewish people comes under a curse of God. And that is frightening.
This evening, we've discussed not only the history of the rise of anti-Semitism in Germany particularly, and its impact across the world. We've also seen truly disturbing statistics. We've heard a very moving letter, a very moving email from one viewer herself, a German Christian now living in the UK, who is troubled by the past of anti-Semitism. Our urge to viewers this evening is that you would pray for the peace of the Jewish people, that you would pray that not only would they know peace with God through Jesus Christ, but that they would be seen by others as God's covenant people, through whom we are able ourselves to be part of the covenant family. This is Behind the Headlines. Thank you for joining us. We hope, God willing, to be back next week. Have a great one.